Missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine.
The conflict in Ukraine has been ongoing, and as we pass beyond the one-year mark, it's crucial to examine the financial costs and economic implications. Here's a short overview of the conflict before we go on to discuss the costs.
Are you ready to listen?
On the 24th of February 2022, Russian tanks, infantry, and aircraft made a lightning advance through 4 main fronts into Ukraine. After the initial gains made by Russia and counteroffensives made by Ukraine, the conflict became static, and it remains to be seen who will gain the upper hand in this phase of the conflict. Now let's get on with the financial costs of the war. First and foremost, this is a military operation, which involves hundreds of thousands of troops from both sides with equipment such as guns, tanks, aircraft, missiles, and ships, just to name a few. The cost of equipping, maintaining, supplying, and feeding such large forces puts a strain on both countries' economies. In 2021, a year before the conflict, Russia had the 5th largest budget allocated solely on military expenditure at 4.1% of its GDP, or gross domestic product, which is $65.91 billion, while Ukraine was spending 3.23% of its GDP on its own military, which amounts to $5.4 billion. Modest spending, to be honest. Fast forward to May 2023. The conflict had reached its 15th month, and both countries had witnessed an astronomical increase in military expenditure. Starting with Ukraine's military budget, which received a jaw-dropping increase from $5.4 billion in 2021 to $44 billion in 2022. That's a massive 714.8% increase on spending alone. Amid the thawing of winter, the Ukrainian parliament voted to increase the budget by another $14.7 billion this 2023. Therefore, the military budget of Ukraine will be one of the highest in the world for this year, totaling $58.7 billion. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, this money will be used to pay for wages, to purchase or replace equipment that was lost in battle, and buy new specialized assets, such as drones. Now let's talk about Russia. A year prior to the conflict, it had the 5th largest budget allocated solely on military expenditure. In 2022, its military expenditure rose by 31%, which amounts to $86.37 billion. Various reports and analysis from 2022 had been circulating online. One example is a budget analysis by Reuters, which described that Russia in 2023 will increase its spending by a massive amount. Reuters concluded Russia will devote 1/3 of its GDP to its military. If true, its budget will balloon to a staggering $155 billion, which would rank them 3rd behind the biggest spenders, the United States and China. However, due to Russia's secretive policies, it's difficult to independently verify this number. So, how do both countries fund their armies? Military spending aside, this doesn't provide the whole picture of how much this conflict has truly cost and will continue to cost. Most, if not all, countries leverage their sources of income from tax, foreign investments, and debts. Those sources are being utilized to fund the purchase of equipment and the upkeep of their standing armies. Let's first focus on Ukraine, a country that has been on the receiving end of substantial financial, humanitarian, and equipment support from numerous NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and EU, European Union countries, notably including the USA, UK, Germany, and Poland, among others. When breaking it down to 3 categories of support that Ukraine had received from January 2022 to February 2023, there's financial aid, humanitarian aid, and lastly, military aid. Firstly, in terms of financial aid, Ukraine had received an impressive $78.6 billion between January 2022 and February 2023. This staggering figure was made possible through the generous contributions of numbers of donors, with various EU institutions leading the pack by providing a total of $33.1 billion. The U.S., not far behind, has contributed $26.6 billion in aid. Even Japan, a country that isn't part of NATO, made a significant contribution of $6.24 billion, proving to be the 3rd biggest donor of financial aid. The rest of the aid came from other NATO and EU countries, reflecting a broad international commitment to Ukraine's cause. Secondly, humanitarian aid stands at a substantial $13.2 billion. While this type of aid doesn't directly fund Ukraine's military efforts, it's crucial in mitigating the human impact of the conflict. The donors for this category are primarily Western states, such as the US and EU countries, with notable contributions from Japan, South Korea, and Switzerland as well. This aid is vital in supporting the citizens of Ukraine, providing things like food, medical care, and shelter to those displaced or otherwise affected by the conflict. Lastly, we come to military aid. This form of aid has been instrumental in equipping Ukraine's military with the tools needed to defend against the invasion. This includes advanced military equipment, such as drones, anti-armor missiles like the Javelin, anti-aircraft missiles from shoulder-fired weapons like the Stinger, and even the highly effective Patriot missiles. Ukraine's armed forces also have been supplied with battle tanks, like the M1 Abrams, Challenger 2, and Leopard 2 tanks. Those are only a few of the many pieces of equipment the West gave to Ukraine, and it doesn't come cheap. The country that's provided the most military aid to Ukraine is the United States, which has provided $47.4 billion to date. Now that the conflict has entered a new phase, this aid won't stop for the foreseeable future. In total, the cost of this military aid currently stands at around $78.5 billion. This constitutes the lion's share of the financial cost of this conflict, affecting not just Ukraine, but those countries that support it as well. As the conflict enters its second year, the economic impact on Ukraine has been severe. According to data from the World Bank, Ukraine's GDP shrunk by an alarming 30% in 2022 alone. This economic downturn has had a profound impact on the civilians living in the country, leading to significant financial challenges. It's important to keep in mind that the ongoing conflict continues to drain Ukraine's coffers, necessitating the sustained support from its allies. Now let's shift our focus from Ukraine to Russia. Russia is a way bigger country in population, landmass, and economy. It dwarfs Ukraine's economy of $200.1 billion in 2021, while Russia's GDP stood at $1.78 trillion. As the conflict continued to ensue, Russia's economy experienced only a 2 to 5% decrease in its GDP. Regardless of sanctions, decreased demand of its oil and natural gas exports to Europe, Russia has remained resilient. While the cost of sanctions, lost revenue from energy exports, and exclusion to trade with other advanced economies, it's still difficult to accurately quantify the cost of the conflict on Russia's economy. Undeniably, Russia, with its expansive economy, hasn't been able to entirely escape the economic strain of this conflict. The international community, chiefly led by the United States, the European nation, and their allies, has unleashed hefty sanctions on Russia, causing a considerable dent in its economy. These economic punitive measures focus on Russia's critical sectors: finance, energy, and defense. They've imposed barriers to international investment inflow and triggered the devaluation of the Russian ruble. In particular, the European Union, Russia's primary trading ally, has implemented restrictions that curb Russia's access to capital markets. It has also limited the export of goods that have both civilian and military use, as well as specific sensitive technologies. Furthermore, Russia's access to certain technologies and services essential for oil production and exploration has been curtailed. Experts estimate that these sanctions annually strip Russia of approximately 2 to 5% of its GDP. The conflict has also adversely affected Russia's energy sector, a vital pillar of its economy. The sanctions, coupled with shifting energy dynamics in Europe, have led to a decreased demand for Russian oil and gas exports, which has in turn affected Russia's revenue streams. The sanctions have also created hurdles for Russia in investing in new energy products, thereby potentially endangering its long-term economic stability. Nevertheless, it's crucial to note that Russia has initiated measures to cushion its economy from these impacts. For example, it has amassed significant foreign exchange reserves and embarked on a policy of replacing imports with domestic goods. Moreover, Russia has been exploring non-Western countries, primarily in Asia, to diversify its trading partners. Being excluded from trading with other advanced economies, Russia has been compelled to explore alternative markets and strive for self-sufficiency in some sectors. This has induced an economic restructuring that may have long-term benefits, but it's also caused immediate economic discomfort. What's the cost to infrastructure and to foreign investments? With the toll on human life and military expenditure already massive, the cost to infrastructure and foreign investments is another significant aspect of this conflict's financial implications. Starting with infrastructure, the conflict has brought massive destruction to the physical landscape of both Ukraine and Russia to a lesser degree. From bombed-out buildings and bridges to devastated railroads and airports, the infrastructure damage in this conflict is enormous. The World Bank estimates the reconstruction cost of infrastructure in Ukraine might rise above a staggering $411 billion. This conflict has also displaced hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian citizens. Russia might not have obvious infrastructural damages, since most of the conflict is concentrated on Ukrainian soil. Still, the economic strain from repairing military bases, upkeep of roads and railways for troop and equipment movement is undeniable. Now let's touch upon another financial aspect of the conflict: the impact on foreign investments. Both Ukraine and Russia have seen a significant downturn in foreign direct investment, FDI, due to the conflict-induced risk and uncertainty. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development reports that Ukraine's FDI slumped by a rough estimate of 40% in 2022. The slide can be attributed to fears of instability, physical infrastructure devastation, and trade route disruptions. Russia's predicament is slightly different. Though it also faced a decline in FDI in 2022, the drop was 22%. Russia's diverse and sizable economy can withstand shocks more effectively than Ukraine's. Nevertheless, the conflict and related sanctions have left international investors apprehensive about engaging with Russia. So, what's the global economic impact? The financial repercussions of the Ukraine conflict are not limited to the involved nations. The world economy, from Europe to Asia and America, has felt the tremors of this conflict. Trade disruption has a significant impact. Both Russia and Ukraine are crucial goods exporters, particularly in the agricultural and energy sectors. The conflict has interrupted these trade channels, causing a hike in prices and supply issues in other countries. For example, global wheat prices have skyrocketed due to concerns over disruptions to Ukraine's harvest, as it's a major wheat exporter. Energy prices have also been affected. Russia, a key oil and natural gas exporter, has faced conflict-induced uncertainty in the energy markets, driving up global energy prices. This hits households and businesses worldwide. Moreover, observing the conflict in Ukraine has led many countries to ramp up their military budgets, either as a deterrent or preparation for possible future conflicts. This spike in military spending is a significant financial burden, diverting resources from crucial areas like healthcare and education. The financial burdens of the Ukraine conflict are wide-ranging and far-reaching, affecting not just military expenses, but also infrastructure, foreign investment, global trade, and energy prices. With the conflict ongoing, these costs are only set to escalate, underlying the pressing need for a peaceful resolution. For now, ordinary citizens of Ukraine and Russia, along with the global community, are shouldering these financial burdens.